Welcome to CultureCast, episode 10. This week we'll be talking about Carla's song. My name is Kevin, and I'm here with Steven and Rudri. Our episode is on the film Carla's song. First, a little bit about the creators of the film. Paul Laverty was the writer of the film. Carla's song was his first screenplay. He obtained his law degree in Glasgow, Scotland, and traveled to Nicaragua in the 1980s. There he worked for a domestic human rights organization and for the war between the Sandinistas and U.S.-backed Contras. He also spent time during the civil rights movements in El Salvador and Guatemala. In a way, Laverty's life parallels George's in the film, as he was a man originally from Glasgow who traveled to Nicaragua during this time. Ken Loach is the director of the film. He is known for his naturalistic, social realism style as well as his socialism. He likes to examine political forces through relationships. As you can see in the film, he emphasizes relationships a lot, so much so that some of his scenes appear to be unscripted. There are a lot of examples in the film where you forget that it's really a film and not just a normal conversation. He has a very strong bond with people on his staff, such as writer Paul Laverty. Laverty has written 9 films for Loach, and they have a very strong bond, and that's something that Ken Loach values in his films.
The Sandinistas are a political party in Nicaragua, and in 1979 they overthrew the Nicaraguan government, ending the Somoza dynasty. The Sandinistas ruled Nicaragua from 1979 to 1990. They instituted mass literacy and promoted health care as well as gender equality in Nicaragua. The Sandinistas was a socialist party. The Contras were a militia formed in 1981 to overthrow the Sandinista party, as they opposed their ideals. They were known for human rights violations and their attacks, such as raping and killing innocent people. However, the United States funded the Contra military efforts in an attempt to fight socialism during the Cold War. The Contras actually imported cocaine to the United States, losing government funding, which was subject to much controversy. The CIA actually sold weapons to Iran in order to obtain money to fund the Contras in their rebellion. This is known as the Iran-Contra affair.
I would now like to begin discussion of the characters. The best person to start with would be one of the main individuals of the film, George. George is a native of Glasgow, Scotland, where he drives a bus for a living. He makes the best out of a bad situation and tries to help his passengers the best he can. One passenger in particular is a woman who sneaks onto the bus and gets caught, Carla. However, helping Carla eventually leads to George losing his job. Carla is depicted as a street-begging, poverty-stricken character. She's a Nicaraguan native, and we learn she came to Glasgow to spread awareness of war. George and Carla develop a romantic relationship, but Carla's depression and symptoms of PTSD cause difficulties. Carla tells George parts of her past but will not go into detail about her ex-lover, Antonio. George wants Carla to reach closure with her past before their relationship progresses any further. George buys plane tickets and the couple agrees to travel to Nicaragua. Here they meet Bradley, an ex-CIA operative. As mentioned, the CIA committed a significant amount of corruption to fund the Contra during this time period. Bradley did not like all the dishonesty and decided to switch to the Sandinista side. There are 2 main settings in this film, Glasgow, Scotland, and Nicaragua. These 2 areas are made out to be polar opposites. In Glasgow, streets are paved, transportation costs money, and Carla is treated as an outcast. However, when the couple goes to Nicaragua, everything is different. Streets are dirt, buses are free, and George is welcomed with open arms. Another element of this would be the 2 scenes involving schoolgirls. When George is talking to the group of young women in Glasgow, they ignore him and show him little respect. When he talks to a group of girls seemingly the same age, they show much more admiration.
From here we will discuss themes, motifs, and symbols. 2 of the main themes of the story are war and hope. These 2 themes go hand in hand. War is the reason Carla and Antonio got separated, and hope is the reason Carla can't forget about Antonio. War is also the reason that Carla and George ended up in the same city, and hope is the reason George wants to trek through this adversity. The language barrier is one motif from Carla's song. Carla uses it as a form of innocence or ignorance when the officer calls for her arrest after she deceives her way onto the bus. Carla also tried to use it to her advantage to avoid speaking about her life at home. The language barrier between George and Carla closes as they become more involved with one another. When the couple is in Nicaragua, the language barrier makes the couple almost seem as one entity. George needs Carla to communicate around the town. Subtitles are also an important part of the film, as there is not many subtitles to show what's going on in English. This provides a closer examination of the language barrier that George was experiencing in the country.
Another significant motif in Carla's song is the appearance of posters throughout the movie. These range from Carla's pictures of home in Nicaragua to propaganda scattered throughout the streets. One poster that stood out was Sammy's Jim Morrison poster. This poster was relevant because it foreshadows a major theme in the film. Jim Morrison was the lead singer of The Doors who died in the late 70s. Morrison's lifeless body was found in a bathtub by his girlfriend, just as George found Carla's body. The poster is illuminated in the background of the dark apartment, foreshadowing what George is about to see.
One of the main symbols represented in the film is music. Music is seen throughout the movie in flashbacks and present day. We see Carla singing songs when she is out with George and in flashbacks when she is revolting with Antonio. I personally think that the music stands for a way of showing a united front, a symbol of hope and freedom. In the film, during the flashback, we see Carla singing with Antonio and other revolutionaries. They are all singing songs together in unison, conveying the same message. When Carla sings songs to George, she is relaying that same kind of message to him, although he does not understand what she is singing about. I also believe that music could be interpreted as a means of communication. As mentioned before, the songs relay a message of their mission as revolutionaries. In addition, we see that Carla receives music sheets from Antonio. This is his way of communicating to her how he feels about her because he can no longer speak due to injuries caused by the war. Another symbol in this film is Antonio. We believe that Antonio can easily be a symbol for the Nicaraguan people. When he is being tortured, we do not see what is occurring. It happens in the distance, essentially off-screen. The Nicaraguan revolutionaries could be seen as faceless in the eyes of the Contras and surrounding people. For example, George did not even know what was occurring in Nicaragua until his sister told him. Antonio embodies the typical Nicaraguan revolutionary.
To preface the next topic, we want to ask you, the listeners, whether or not you would have taken Carla back to Nicaragua if you were in George's place. Personally, I don't believe it makes a lot of sense to take Carla back, or how George managed to get tickets to Nicaragua. As a regularly suspended bus driver in Glasgow, it does not make sense how George could possibly afford 2 immediate tickets to Nicaragua. Also, I do not think it was smart to take Carla back to a war-ridden country knowing that she had just attempted to commit suicide due to post-traumatic stress disorder. George was fully aware that Carla had been diagnosed with PTSD because he had gone to the hospital and learned that this was their second suicide attempt due to PTSD in the last 6 weeks. Obviously, the emotional wounds from her experiences in Nicaragua are still fresh, and she has not had the proper time to deal with them. I do not think the best way to deal with something as traumatic as what Carla's experienced is by throwing her right back into the war-laden situation.
Post-traumatic stress disorder is caused by witnessing a terrifying event, either directly or indirectly. This causes re-experiencing symptoms, including flashbacks or bad dreams, avoidance symptoms where the patient distances themselves from reminders of the experience, and feeling depressed or guilty. Carla experienced all of these symptoms. We see her negatively react to George when he inquires about her past. She responds, no questions. She also experiences bad dreams when George witnesses. George believes that having re-exposure to these events will help her cope with what she is feeling. This relates to one of the behavioral therapies that many people dealing with PTSD go through. Exposure therapy deals with having a medical therapist expose the trauma the patient has experienced by the use of mental imagery, writing, or visiting where the event happened. This is a mechanism used to help people with PTSD deal with their feelings. In one sense, George was correct in taking her back to where the events took place, but seeing as Nicaragua was still in war and revolt, I do not believe it was the best decision at the time. It is interesting to comment on the fact that the writer of the film had gone to Nicaragua during the time of these events were taking place. This piece could be his take on post-traumatic culture. Now we ask the listeners to think about PTSD and post-traumatic culture and think about whether or not you believe Carla benefited from going back to Nicaragua or was better off staying in Glasgow. Personally, I believe that it was too soon for her to go back to Nicaragua because traumatic events were still taking place. But ultimately, she got her closure in regards to Antonio, so her trip back to Nicaragua could be seen as a positive outcome.
Next, we will briefly discuss some similar themes from this week's film and last week's book, Information for Foreigners. Both deal with post-traumatic culture. Information for Foreigners allows the audience to view all these traumatic events occurring during the Argentine Dirty War. In the movie, we experience post-traumatic culture through the eyes of Carla. We as viewers of the film are given a great bit of distance from the traumatic events occurring during the Nicaraguan revolt, while as an audience member for Information for Foreigners, we are given a more personal exposure to events occurring. As listeners, we hope you think about how a play is able to present post-traumatic culture in comparison to how a film is able to present post-traumatic culture.
The following scene occurs when George and Bradley are talking and Carla is inside her home watching. We see a wide shot with a light illuminating her face as she faces where the action is occurring. Her posture appears to be stressed and concerned, which makes sense taking into consideration her current circumstances. This scene is during the climax where we learn everything about what has happened to Antonio, the symbol of the Nicaraguans. We would like to thank you for listening to this week's episode of CultureCast as we discuss Carla's song. We hope you were able to think more deeply about the revolts happening everywhere around the world and how post-traumatic stress culture is seen in both books and film. Thank you for listening.